Hi, Huntresses. Welcome to Talk Rich to Me,
where we explore the human side of finance. We are your co-hosts,
Yesenia Rhodes
and Stephanie Gutman,
co-founders of Huntress Wealth.
Today we're joined by Julie Shui, who went from global luxury cosmetics executive to helping people rewrite their beliefs through hypnotherapy. Her story is a powerful look at burnout, identity, and our beliefs about money. So, Julie, starting back at the beginning, what beliefs did you grow up with around success and identity?
What beliefs I grew up around success and identity? Wow, that's a big question. What I would say is I grew up in the US, but also with the Chinese culture. And so those two really influenced, for me, what success and identity meant. And for me, it meant that I was constantly living for almost my entire life, up until recently, from the outside in, which meant that it was coming from a place of how I needed to be perceived in the world, right? What meant success, how success was defined, right? And growing up in the US, in a place where we were raised, I looked different from everybody else. And so when you're a child, the need to belong, the need to feel connected, the need to feel accepted was a really big element of living from the outside in, living from a place of how I wanted to be perceived in the world, right? So it wasn't just about getting all the good grades and being a good girl and being a straight A student. My father was also the golden child, so I had a lot of expectations to step into as the oldest child, but also all the societal conditioning, right, around in American culture, around constantly achieving, never stopping, the next thing, always go, go, go. So all of that really shaped my upbringing and who I was for a large part of my life.
Yeah. What path did that lead you on?
Well, it helped me build an amazing career. I can't lie, right? At least what I thought I wanted. And so because I was living from that place, I just kept building this corporate career in luxury cosmetics, first in the US and then moving to Shanghai and ultimately landing in Barcelona. So I worked in 3 different continents. And I got to a place in my career where I was making a ton of money. I had this incredible title. I was traveling all the time, and I was managing not only a substantial business, and in terms of from a profitability standpoint, but also just in terms of the sheer number of people that I was managing. So I thought, if I had imagined myself as a younger child, seeing that version of me, I would have thought, oh, she made it. She's doing exactly the thing that would have defined what success means, would have defined acceptance in this world, right? But I got there and I was so unhappy. I was miserable and burnt out and frustrated.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like you probably also felt proud of yourself for like achieving, and performing and fulfilling your identity, right? But then it kind of wasn't adding up, right?
No. And I know what it comes down to at the end was the suppression of who I really was. And so I was doing all these things because this is what I thought success meant. This is what I thought I wanted. Because again, I was living from the place of how I wanted to be perceived in the world.
Yeah.
And so I was suppressing how I really felt. I wasn't able to express my emotions. I wasn't able to ask for help. And so that all led me to this burnout because I was stuck in a place where I felt stuck basically. And I wasn't able to go to the people that I need to go to, or even mentors in my life, to help navigate myself out of that situation.
Yeah. How did you first start to know that something was wrong?
So interesting because I used to always have executive coaching in senior leadership positions. Would get paired with executive coaches. And it was so funny because I had never done therapy.
Yeah.
in my life up to that point. I never started therapy until after I left my corporate job.
Hmm.
And so I was working with these coaches and not knowing how to process emotions. And I would show up at these leadership trainings and in these coaching sessions, and I would just be so emotional. And I'm an emotional, sensitive person to begin with, but I would just come with all this emotion, and I would often have tears, and I could never explain why. But I knew something felt off. And the coaches that I worked with, I had some really amazing coaches, but I don't know if things have changed now, but the capacity in which they worked with you on were specifically on issues that you had in the workplace and not going into something deeper.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so something was signaling to me that there was something deeper. There was all this emotion that I couldn't explain or articulate, and I didn't understand why. But I
Yeah.
knew something wasn't feeling right.
And it's interesting because you would expect maybe coaches in a workplace to be respecting a boundary, which sounds like
Mhm.
they might have been, right? But it doesn't really allow you to get to underlying reasons.
Right. Because the thing is that at the end of the day, whatever issues or challenges you face, whatever blocks you have, they're just manifestations of something that's much deeper. Right.
Yeah.
And so the key to unlock for any of the issues that we have, whether it's in the workplace, the struggles that we have, whether it's money, it always
Yeah.
comes back down to something that's a deeper root cause or belief, a limiting belief that we have, which I didn't understand at the time. And sadly, the coaches, and not for the lack of not wanting to, it just wasn't the environment in which it was set up,
Yeah.
that they were able to help me navigate that.
So, the professional coaches weren't kind of going the feeling the layer back on the onion. How did that, you started to know something was wrong. You had
Mhm.
somewhat of this professional coaching support system. What really led to knowing you needed to make a change?
I got completely burnt out.
Yeah. What did
I
that look
just
like?
was at the place where I was physically exhausted. I woke up every morning with a bit of dread, or maybe a lot of it. Um, I felt suffocated. I felt like I didn't have support and I was failing.
Mm-hmm.
It was also the culture I was in was such that I felt a bit boxed in, so I couldn't ask for help, even though I could have, but I was
Mm-hmm.
made to believe that I couldn't.
Yeah.
And so all of that, just I felt so small, and I was just tired. And I always knew that I would do something else in my life. I would have another career. I didn't know what it was. I just had this feeling inside of me that there was something else in my lifetime besides what I was doing. And I had always imagined myself in Europe. So that conversation started to happen with my last partner, and coincident or in parallel, I would say. Right. So in
Mm-hmm.
parallel, as this was all kind of crumbling down, we had made the decision to make that next move.
Yeah.
And so it culminated in me basically quitting and deciding to leave my career. And the interesting thing is I actually just had a conversation with a friend the other day who's going through something very similar, who left her job. But the thing is that after I left, I had a lot of opportunities to move into different positions, to stay in Asia, take on some really incredible roles. But I just
Mm-hmm.
was so exhausted and so tired, energetically, physically, emotionally, that I just needed to rest.
Yeah, I know. In talking about your story, it was interesting, even after you went to Barcelona and kind of found that off ramp,
Hmm.
that you had done some consulting still in the industry and it
Hmm.
still was bringing these feelings, right? Like, whole other
Absolutely.
place, maybe a slightly different culture. You were more in control because you were doing
Hmm.
consulting, right?
Absolutely.
But it
Yes.
still wasn't really hitting the right note for you.
No, no. I
Yeah.
knew that I wasn't sure if it because it was too soon at that time
Yeah.
that I had started, because I had given myself maybe about a year and took on the consulting job.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was that, or if it was at the moment I didn't know if it was that, or if it was, that I just really needed something different. And now I know that, yeah, no, I'm I'm in the next phase of my life, right?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I was gonna say, in some ways, it was still outside in, right? Like it
Oh,
was,
100%, because I hadn't done any work yet.
yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't done the work yet. Yeah.
Uh, so then a bunch of change came all at the same time.
Mhm.
You had this move to Barcelona with your then partner, and then what happened?
So it was a full trifecta. Everything blew up. we had, I left the job, right? So I had been in corporate cosmetics for luxury cosmetics for 20 years. So I decided I needed to leave that and take a break and then figure out what was next. But as we were saying earlier, that was my identity. That was everything I tied myself to. And I didn't know who I was outside of that. So that was the first thing, was that I didn't know who I was. I moved to Barcelona and then COVID hit and then the relationship ended. So I had this trifecta of things where I moved for someone, I didn't know anybody else. I had no community, no people around me to support me. I didn't know who I was. And so I was in a really dark place. And that's when I decided to seek therapy. And I remember the first thing my therapist said to me, and she said, yes, there's one way to look at it is to say you're in this really dark spot. But the other
Mhm.
way to reframe it is to say you get to start over.
Yeah.
And when she said that, I was like, oh, that feels so refreshing. And as hard as I still was in that moment, going through everything, it was still so fresh and raw. But just that little light, that little reframe changed things for me. There started to be
Yeah.
kind of a glimmer to be like, oh, I get to actually rewrite this next part of my life.
Yeah. It's interesting your forced pause, right? Like
Mhm.
I mean, the career shift was your choice, right?
Yeah.
Geographic shift was your choice, but a relationship ending probably partly your choice, and then also, but COVID absolutely not your choice, right?
Right. Right.
And so it's. Do you think you would have found the space for this identity shift without that quiet? Do you think you could have gotten through that? COVID.
Yeah. No, I don't know. Actually, I have thought about it before. Perhaps I would have. I'm
Mhm.
certain actually I would have. I just don't know how I would have gone about it and how long it would have taken me.
Yeah.
And as I had shared with you before in our previous conversation, COVID really for me was a gift, because when I had pulled myself out of that rat race, right? And because I had been living for 40 years at that time,
Mhm.
up until that moment, doing all these things, striving for what I thought was success and happiness and achievement, and decided to pull myself out of that without knowing what was next, I felt like I was pulling myself out of the rat race. And I could see everybody else that I was working with or used to work with continuing to have these crazy accomplishments and promotions and all the things. And that was a hard thing to sit with. And then COVID hit and the world stopped.
Yeah.
And so then I got to just take a breath and start
Mhm.
to do the work without
Yeah.
feeling this need of like, I'm missing out. I'm not there yet. Or, right? And feeling
Yeah.
bad. Hmm.
It's interesting. You then had like a community in the pause. And so what were some of the tools that you found during this? We'll call it the break, the
Yeah.
shift.
Well, so COVID itself was when I started really leaning into exploring. Actually, at that point, I hadn't even really started to explore who am I. I think I was.
Mhm.
It was just such a shock that that had happened, that the war had stopped, and I was just coming. I mean, it had literally been less than 6 months,
Mhm.
since I had stopped working before COVID hit. So I hadn't time to really process everything to realize like, oh, I need to do the work. And the relationship actually didn't end until after COVID.
Yeah.
So COVID for me was just a time of initiating what it felt like to sit with self,
Mhm.
to reflect, to start to let creativity start to bubble again, right? And because in that up until that point, I was always on constant, I was constantly running, right? My dial was constantly like turned all the way up, right?
Yeah.
Because it is my nature also to walk fast, to talk fast, to move fast. That's just inherently who I am, right?
Mhm.
And then also the conditioning and the culture. Actually, I take it back. It's not inherently who I am. I think this is how I was conditioned, right? There's a part of me that is also very calm and very gentle, but I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know what stillness and pause was. And I remember that concept was first introduced to me by my yoga teacher in 2017. I went on my first yoga retreat, and I was like, what is that? And it felt so uncomfortable. And so COVID allowed me to finally, for the first time, start to open up and understand, what is it like to stop?
Mhm.
What is it like to slow down? What is it like to actually sit with yourself in stillness? And that the paradox of life is actually more things happen when you start to slow down.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah.
I know was it that same yoga teacher that you are now
Yes.
able to take classes again?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Because she went
Exactly.
online, right?
That's
Because
correct. So
she
Adriana was
wasn't local.
no, no, she was based in London. So there was no way I would have ever been able to connect with her unless I was traveling or, in person. But COVID gave us the chance to reconnect online. And she started holding those spaces that allowed me to go in.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I know there was traditional talk therapy involved. I know there was yoga.
Actually, no, I went straight into hypnotherapy.
Straight into hypnotherapy. Oh, I
Went
thought there
straight
was
into
also talk
hypnotherapy.
therapy.
No,
Okay.
I went
Uh,
straight for hypnotherapy. I had never done any therapy in my life. And there was a woman that I had been following on social for other things. And I hadn't realized that she was a hypnotherapist. And I think, you see things when you need to see them. And all of a sudden I started seeing her hypnotherapy messages. And that was when I decided I had also wanted to find a therapist. And so I just went straight for her. And
awesome.
I remember at the time my sisters were like, "Are you sure about that?" Right? Because when we think about therapy in the most traditional sense, and a lot has changed since, I mean, even in the last 5, 6 years, right? In terms of the different types of modalities that are available for therapy. But in our minds, it was still very traditional at that time. And so it was talk therapy. So when my sisters were like, "You're going to do hypnotherapy?" I was like, yeah, I felt called to lean into her.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started with hypnotherapy.
Well, it's good. Like hypnotherapy is something that we see like growing up or even professionally, right? We see it as like this trick on stage, like someone making someone cluck like a chicken, right? Or like just how it's presented in media and maybe some of our settings before. It looks like this like total loss of control. What is
Mhm.
it actually like?
So this was exactly why my sisters questioned it,
Uh-huh.
right? Because we have this perception in our mind of what hypnotherapy is, because we see stage hypnosis as more common than anything else. And it's changing obviously now, and hypnotherapy goes all the way back to Freud, and it's
Mhm.
becoming more popular again. But the way hypnosis works is that it just puts us into a very highly suggestible state, which is actually why you see people doing certain things that are silly on stage, is because the stage hypnotist is actually choosing people who are the most suggestible, right, to do these certain things. But the thing is, at
Open
the
to
end of the day,
silliness, perhaps.
open to doing these things 100%. But the thing is that you're still in control. The
Mhm.
hypnotist, whether it's myself or other hypnotherapists or a stage hypnotist, they can't make you do anything that you don't want to do, right? So if they tell you go rob a bank or give me $1 million, you're not going to do that, because unless maybe you actually really want to, right? But if there's something inside you that doesn't want to do that, it's not going to
Mhm.
happen.
Yeah.
And so the thing with hypnotherapy is it just puts you into this really deeply relaxed state
Mhm.
where your conscious mind, which is your critical thinking mind, your short-term memory part of your brain, takes a back seat and is super relaxed. And then we're able to access your subconscious mind, which is your long-term memory. It's been on record since your inception, since you were a baby in the womb. It takes on everything that you experience and it makes certain beliefs, and everything is stored and recorded there. It's like this data bank of all your memories and all your experiences, right?
Mhm.
And it basically controls, and it's running the show in the background without us even knowing it. So the reasons why we act the way we act, how we behave, our habits, our emotions, right, is really driven by the subconscious mind. And so in hypnosis, we're able to access the subconscious mind directly. And so in hypnotherapy, what we do is, because we can access the subconscious mind, then we're able to get to memories and beliefs that often happen when you're a child, especially when it comes to money. Our childhood beliefs and our habits around money actually were formed before the age of 5,
Yeah.
right? So in hypnotherapy, we're able to go back to the root to guide you through what happened, why you have the behaviors that you have today as an adult, what it's linked to. And once you understand that, you can say, okay, well, I don't need that anymore, because oftentimes we made those beliefs, we created coping mechanisms to deal with things as a child,
Yeah.
right? But as an adult, we no longer need to hold on to those things because we're independent. We don't need to depend on somebody. We have a voice, we can speak, right? So that in the hypnotherapy session, we're able to rewire those beliefs, and then you come out of it with a new understanding.
Yeah.
So, and this is also then where neuroscience and epigenetics come into play, right? Because it's then creating new neural pathways to rewire in new beliefs. It's just like anytime you want to create a new behavior, start a new habit, you have to continue doing that and building that muscle, right? And so in hypnotherapy and in the work that I do, we do the session and then we continue to wire in those new beliefs and strengthen these new neurons, these neural pathways, until that becomes a new familiar, or a new habit that's then familiar.
Well, and new stories that we tell ourselves, right?
That's
So
exactly
we're
right. Yeah.
constantly telling ourselves stories.
Yeah. Because the thing is that the subconscious mind doesn't discern what's right or wrong. It just takes on the beliefs and the emotions that you feel, right? And it goes back to our primal days, right? When the objective is to keep ourselves safe. And so it doesn't know right or wrong. It just wants to keep you safe. But what's safe is what's familiar. So it's then recreating a new sense of familiarity and a new sense of safety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've touched on money a bit when talking about hypnotherapy. Before we kind of go into what your practice looks like today, let's kind of go back to the personal story. How did money impact your journey from, high-powered job through this shift and finding a more connected self? How did money support you? How did it challenge you? Just how did it show up?
So to say this in the most probably concise way as possible, the thing is that money is a part of our everyday life. But we don't think about it that way. We don't acknowledge it. And so for me, my money story growing up was I was a child of immigrants. Money was scarce. My parents worked and saved everything. They were very conservative with their money. So I was taught to save. I was taught to never accrue debt. And, but I was never taught how to make my money work for me. Right. And so then I had my own money story and journey with coming from a very conservative background, but then also wanting to spend money to be able to fit in. And so as I worked and as I climbed that corporate ladder and started to make a lot more money, I was spending as well. And I was saving a little bit, but I wasn't really doing anything in terms of budgeting. And I was definitely not investing in any sense of the word. And I always felt a lot of shame and guilt for it because I could see, and not a lot of people around me were doing this or that I consciously knew of, but I remember I had one colleague who did have a financial planner, and my best friend after college started working with also someone that was helping her invest, right? So she was doing that and she was learning. And so I would see these things, but I always let myself fall victim still to my story and saying that I want to, instead of saying I want to choose differently, I just let myself say like, well, I was never taught that. And so I'm just going to continue on my own way and feel the shame and guilt about it.
Well, and money helped back to that like success and identity so closely tied, right? Like you were successful in making all of this money, but you were also using the money to continue to like reinforce and portray that success.
That's correct.
Right.
That's correct. Exactly. And so the one thing that I was doing is I was doing some saving and I was putting it into some time deposits, at a decent interest rate at the time, but that was all I was doing. I wasn't doing anything else. I had a 401k in the US when I was working there. But other than that, I stopped contributing to that when I moved to China. And so it was really about savings.
Yeah.
And I just felt such a tremendous amount of shame and guilt because I knew that I should be doing more with the money,
Mhm.
right? But I didn't understand it enough. And I just told myself that I was just way too busy, or I let myself being too busy be the excuse for not actually prioritizing it. Right. I mean, it is true that I was traveling 3 times a week, every single week. I was working in sales. And so I wasn't sleeping, I was with my team up until probably midnight and then up the next morning again, going to work. And so I was just allowing myself to spin in that cycle without taking time to say, let me figure this out, or even talk to people.
Yeah, it's part of the burnout cycle, right? Like not having time where taking care of yourself financially is part of self-care, right?
Oh,
Like
that concept? Didn't
I
know.
don't know if you were making it to the doctor regularly and like this
This I
whole
was.
oh that's
This I was.
great.
This I was. Yes.
But like the whole suite of self-care, right?
Yeah.
Like taking care of your money is part of that. And that's probably a piece of that burnout cycle too, right?
Added to all the shame and the guilt and the frustration I was already feeling inside, that everything I held inside, and then the money piece just was a part of that story, right? So
Yeah,
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Mm.
certainly reinforcing. How did it show up during the shift? You were able to take some time after leaving, right?
Yes. So basically, my thanks to my last partner, he decided to learn how to invest, and so alongside him, I basically learned as well. And it was during COVID, so we had time, right?
It was the hobby.
Yeah, it was a fantastic hobby, and I was very fortunate to enter the market at that time, right?
Um,
March of 2020. But yeah, everything he was reading and the online trainings that he was taking, he would just pass everything to me. So I was absorbing everything, and it was all the classics when you think about financial education, the Warren Buffetts, and we're taking courses on Udemy and Benjamin Graham and things like this, right? Ray Dalio. So that's where I started, but I also learned not only how to invest, and I started investing, but I also learned how to read all the data, how to read all the numbers. And I wasn't day trading per se. I was doing a little bit, I was dabbling a little bit, but I was really in it for the long term.
yeah.
And that's how I,
Which
and
we
that's,
learn as adults, we learn by doing, right? So, like, well, we're totally not team day trading, right? Doing
Mhm.
some of that behavior just helps you build the confidence in what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, I think, also less scary because I was doing it with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't feel alone in that.
Yeah.
I think is a big part of it. Also, many of our money stories is that we often feel alone in the
Mm-hmm.
journey.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, Hopefully not anymore.
Absolutely.
That's a reality, right? Is I believe you were sharing this stat with me about like the percentage of people that don't talk about money. What was that?
62%. So there was a
And it's
study that was done in 2023 by Empower that said 62% of people, regardless of gender,
yeah,
uh, don't talk about money with their family, with their friends, with their partner.
yeah,
They would rather talk about politics or death. And that number, I know, it's crazy, but I fell into that
yeah.
statistic.
Hmm.
And the thing is that when you segment the population or the gender and you look at women, that number is even higher than 62%. That number is in the over 80%
Yeah. And so
of
you
women
had
don't.
someone to talk with about it, like while you were
Mhm.
learning, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
less lonely.
Yeah.
And now you love to talk about money. Uh,
I think it's very important. I mean, part of my number one mission, I have three, but my first mission is to break the taboo, to break the silence. I think we need to be talking about it because there's so much, it is such a taboo topic in so many cultures. But where does that actually come from? And why is that?
yeah.
Right? Because what ends up creating is it ends up creating a lot of the same feelings amongst all of us, but very individual and siloed versus feeling that all together. And the thing is, when we come together to talk about that, right, it
Mhm.
actually it breaks that shame and that secrecy.
Yeah, I've reflected on this a little bit, and it kind of dawned on me that, you know, the idea of talking about money, it's like we all grew up in households that either did or didn't embrace that,
Mhm.
right? And there's probably varying degrees of embracing it or not. Uh, but when you look at like socioeconomically, if you didn't have a lot of money growing up, you probably knew and realized that. And so, on
Mhm.
some level, maybe there's more talking about it. Maybe it looks more like budgeting and saving, right? But there's some more talking about it. And if you grow up on the other end of it, right,
Mhm.
you probably also are talking about money more, right? Because maybe not super overtly, but maybe sometimes it is overtly. Like if, your parents were able to give you a trust, or, you're getting published in by Forbes how much money your family has, right? Like there's this other end of talking about it. But there's this like real insulation in the middle of
Mhm.
not talking about money. And I think that goes across
It
cultures,
does.
right?
It goes
Um,
across cultures. It goes across socioeconomic status.
Yeah, it's we all bring different things to it.
Mhm.
The reason why might be different, right? But there's a whole lot of
Mhm.
reasons why people don't talk about money.
Actually, it's interesting. The reason why on the surface might be similar, but the reason at the root isn't.
Yeah.
The reason at the root and all the work I do, it comes back to how I feel about myself, my self-worth, right? And
Mhm.
this idea of, does it feel safe within my body, my nervous system to
Yeah.
hold, to receive money? So it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if you come from money or if you don't. It all
Mhm.
comes back down to, at the end, how do I feel about myself? And why am I showing up that way is actually directly related to my own self-worth.
Yeah.
Mm.
So your hypnotherapy practice, you went at surprise. You went into hypnotherapy.
Right.
I know of several of the things you experienced during your shift, right?
Mhm.
How did you decide to go into it for yourself, and where do you focus?
So I basically started this journey of self-discovery, figuring out, who am I now that I don't have this career, because that was my identity. And the having lived abroad and traveled quite extensively, I realized that I came from a place where that was how you were introduced, or when you met someone for the first time, that was what you were asked, right? Or what you were offered. And the more I spent time abroad, the more you realize that's just a part of who you are. But I didn't know who that was. And so I spent all this time journaling, doing meditation, doing yoga, and doing therapy to figure out who I was, right?
Mhm.
And what my next step was going to be.
Yeah.
And then I realized that my purpose in this world is to help other people. And I decided that that would be through hypnotherapy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ah, love that. All right. So we are going to end every podcast with the same two questions. First, what is your biggest piece of advice to offer other huntresses?
Hard to narrow down to just one. But I would say that oftentimes, especially as women, women plus, we think that we have to have all the answers, that we have to have everything figured out before we start. And so often what stops us from starting is because we aren't ready. We don't feel ready, right? So I think the number one thing for me to offer, and what I tell people often, is just to start wherever you are, and that you don't need to have all the answers, right? Just start. So that would probably be the first thing. And the second thing, and this isn't necessarily advice in terms of action, but more just to be aware that you're not alone,
Mhm.
right? It's never too late to start, and you're never too old. I didn't start really investing. I mean, besides the 401k, I didn't start my investing journey or change my career until I was in my early 40s. And you see a lot of this in social now, right? You see a lot of entrepreneurs, successful entrepreneurs, whether it's Mel Robbins or Oprah or even, other businesses, right? Of people who didn't get to that level of success until they were significantly later in their life. And so my whole thing is that it's never too late to start. Start where you are.
Start where you are. I love that.
Yeah.
All right. And finally, Julie, what does rich mean to you?
So when I think of the word rich, I think more of wealth, right? And what does wealth mean to me? And for me, money is just a tool. It's just a part of that. It's not, wealth for me is made up of many things, right? What it means to be rich is made up of many things. But when we think about money, and part of the mission that Huntress is doing, for me, money is a tool that allows you to live your purpose, that allows you to do the things that you want to do in this lifetime, to be able to invest in the people that you care about, in your families and your friends and your communities, right? So for me, it's really freedom to be able to do the things that I meant to do, to invest in the things that I want to invest in, right? To make an impact and to make a change. And so I think that's part of it. But also when I think about wealth, I think about how am I physically, how am I in my physical body, my mental body, and all of that. Yeah. Right. So for me, it's a very holistic perspective.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us here today, Julie. I love hearing about your journey, and I'm so glad that you were willing to share it with others today. Julie Shui is now an expert with Huntress, so she's available on the inside of the membership. Not doing full hypnotherapy, at least not yet, but doing visualization sessions to help you connect with that empowered future self so you can help map out those first steps in your journey.
Yeah, helping those take that first step wherever they are.
You've been listening to Talk Rich to Me, a production from Huntress Wealth. For more chill takes on finance, sign up for our newsletter at huntresswealth.com. That's HUNTRESSWEALTH.com.